Ethan Clark had always considered himself careful, polite, and mostly invisible in social situations. At least, he thought he was invisible, until the moment he sat down in the wrong seat at the Zyphoran banquet. The palace hall stretched wider than any human mind could easily comprehend. Its ceilings shimmered with floating lights that changed color depending on the mood of the room. Tables floated a few inches off the polished floor, and exotic foods swirled gently above them in transparent orbs. The air was rich with fragrances he could not name, and the alien guests, all tall, angular, with eyes that reflected light like liquid crystal, watched him with something that felt like a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Ethan looked around nervously. He had been invited as the human ambassador, representing Earth in its first official contact with Zyphora. He had prepared for every possible protocol except for the one he was about to break. He saw a seat that seemed perfect, central elegant, with a golden insignia carved into the floating platform. Without thinking, he sat down. The moment he did, the entire hall went silent. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Silver-tinged cutlery hovered in midair. Even the floating dishes paused as if time itself had taken a breath. Ethan froze. Something was wrong. Every alien in the room turned their head to him in unison. The air grew heavier. He tried to stand, but before he could move, a shadow fell over him. A tall figure in deep crimson robes, moving with the fluid grace of someone entirely sure of their place in the universe. The figure stopped in front of him. She was taller than any human, with skin that glowed faintly under the hall lights and eyes that burned with intelligence and authority. Her hair moved slightly on its own, as if carried by an unseen breeze. Ethan's heart raced. He had heard rumors about the Zyphoran royal family, about the princess known as Kelara, the deadliest, most cunning member of the court. She had been trained in combat, politics, and strategy since birth, and stories of her ruthless decisions were whispered even in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. And now she was looking directly at him. "You have sat where you should not," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that pressed against his chest. It wasn't anger exactly, but an authority so complete that Ethan felt as though he might physically collapse under it. I'm so sorry," Ethan stammered. "I didn't know. I thought it was just a—" She raised a hand, and the room fell completely silent again. "Silence," she commanded. It was a single word, yet it echoed through the hall as if the walls themselves had obeyed. "This human," she continued, turning her piercing eyes back to Ethan, "is now bound to me by engagement." She swept her hand toward the audience, and the assembled nobles murmured in approval or astonishment. He couldn't tell which. In Zyphora, one who sits in the seat of the Princess of Shadows is considered worthy of joining the royal line. The choice is not mine alone. It is law. He had traveled across the stars as a diplomat, but he had never imagined diplomacy could feel so terrifyingly literal. Before he could protest further, Kelara motioned for two guards who approached with disciplined precision. "Escort him," she said simply. Ethan tried to resist, but the guards did not raise their hands. They merely guided him gently, though firmly, through the palace corridors. Every step echoed in his chest. He passed windows that looked out onto alien gardens filled with floating plants and streams that glimmered with bioluminescent light. He tried to memorize everything, partly out of awe, partly to delay his panic. Finally, they stopped before a large door made of a shimmering material he couldn't identify. The guards stepped back. Kelara entered first, motioning for him to follow. The room inside was vast, softly lit, filled with alien artifacts and glowing panels that seemed to pulse with information. Ethan stumbled slightly as he entered. "Look," he said, trying to gather some courage. "I really didn't mean to sit there. It was a mistake." "Humans are fascinating," she said. "So fragile yet persistent. I'm curious to see how long this persistence lasts. You are human, yes, but you have now entered a world that is not entirely yours to choose." She stepped closer, her eyes scanning him as if reading not just his thoughts, but his potential, his weaknesses, and his courage. "You will stay human, you will learn our ways, you will be tested. And perhaps," she added almost softly, "you will survive. It is challenge. You will face tests not to humiliate you, but to see if you are worthy. And perhaps," she leaned slightly closer, "if you can teach us something unexpected. Perhaps unpredictability is a skill the Zyphoran court has undervalued. We will see." The walls seemed alive, panels flickering with data in a language he could not read. The artifacts glimmered, some softly humming, others seemingly pulsing like a heartbeat. Every so often, Kelara returned to check on him, observing silently from a distance. She never spoke unless she intended to, but every glance felt like a measure of his worth. At dinner, which arrived in floating orbs he had to catch carefully, Ethan discovered more of the court's rules by accident. The food was edible, but the spices were unlike anything on Earth, and the texture shifted as it moved through the air. He fumbled with utensils, dropped a few orbs, and tried not to look foolish, but Kilara only observed. No reprimand, no laughter. Just watchful eyes, calculating, patient, waiting. By the end of the meal, Ethan realized something startling. The human's strengths, adaptability, curiosity, and the ability to improvise were what Kilara seemed to value most. The other nobles, he noticed, were elegant, precise, and unyielding. A mistake was shameful, but a human mistake, perhaps it revealed potential. As the night drew on, Kilara finally spoke, standing behind him as he admired the alien night sky through a massive window. "Do you understand, human, that your life will be different from tonight onward?" she asked. I think so," Ethan said slowly. I guess I. "And your very spirit. You may survive, you may not. But if you do, you will be remembered in Xyphoran history. Rest, human. Tomorrow your first test begins at sunrise. Do not fail." Somewhere deep inside, a small spark of determination lit within him. He had made mistakes before. He had been underestimated before. And somehow he felt that, just maybe, humans had a way of surprising even the deadliest princesses. And for the first time, Ethan Clarke allowed himself to imagine not just surviving Xyphora, but thriving. The morning sunlight in Xyphora was unlike any Ethan had ever seen. It didn't just illuminate, it shimmered across the palace grounds in soft, shifting colors, bouncing off crystal walls and floating walkways. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and something metallic, a combination that made Ethan's stomach twist nervously. He sat on the edge of a floating platform in Kilara's quarters, trying to calm himself. His mind replayed the previous night's events, sitting in the wrong seat, the dead silence, Kilara's commanding gaze, and the terrifying announcement of engagement. It all felt unreal, like a dream he couldn't wake from. Then came a quiet voice behind him. "Rise, human." "You will come with me," she said. "Your first lesson begins at the Hall of Trials. Do not be late." He followed down hallways that twisted in ways no human architecture should allow, staircases floating at odd angles and doors that slid open before he even reached them. His legs felt unsteady, but he forced himself to keep pace. The Hall of Trials was massive, its walls lined with panels that glimmered like liquid metal. In the center was a platform that hummed softly, and surrounding it were various devices that Ethan could not even begin to identify. Other beings were present, Xyphoran nobles, some of whom had been observing him discreetly during the banquet. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to amusement, but most looked skeptical. Kilara stood beside him. "Your first task," she said, voice steady, "is observation and adaptation. You will face 3 challenges. Each tests a different aspect of your abilities. Fail, and you will be noted as unprepared. Succeed, and you may earn respect." Humans had challenges, yes, but nothing that measured every instinct, thought, and reaction in the same moment. The first challenge appeared immediately. A floating puzzle of glowing shapes hovered in the air before him. Triangles, spheres, and irregular forms shifted in space, rotating and sliding along invisible tracks. A voice, neither male nor female, spoke from everywhere and nowhere. "Arrange the pieces in a pattern that satisfies the equilibrium." He realized the pieces responded to intent, not strength. He took a deep breath. Humans were problem solvers, often in creative ways. He experimented, nudging pieces gently, imagining patterns, testing combinations. Slowly, the floating shapes began to settle. A sequence of clicks sounded, lights flashed, and the puzzle stabilized. The voice spoke again. Observation and adaptation demonstrated. Ethan realized quickly that some were traps. Touching them would send a shock or release a blinding flash. The task was simple in description: cross the platforms to reach the far side. Simple, yes, but deadly in practice. He hesitated. The other aliens would have leapt gracefully, their bodies honed for precision. Ethan's body was slower, clumsier, built for survival in a world that didn't float or hum. But he had something else: ingenuity. He studied the platforms. He noticed patterns. A red flash meant delay, a green flash meant safe. Timing, observation, and patience, human strengths, became his tools. He waited, calculated, and leapt at precise moments, adjusting midair when a platform shifted unexpectedly. His heart pounded, but his mind stayed clear. One misstep and the challenge would reset. Finally, he reached the other side. A small light above the platform pulsed, a symbol of success. Kilara's eyes narrowed slightly, the faintest hint of approval in her gaze. "Clever," she said, voice low. "Not fast, but precise, not bad for a human." Ethan took a deep breath. He had read books about alien customs, studied potential negotiation strategies, and relied on basic human principles: honesty, empathy, and careful listening. He paused, listened to each, and chose his words with care. Where one tried to trap him, he responded politely but firmly. Where another tested his honesty, he answered truthfully, appealing to reason. And when the third tried to confuse him, he asked clarifying questions, revealing the contradictions without anger or offense. Kilara watched him closely, leaning slightly forward as if to see into his mind. The nobles stepped back, murmuring. Ethan realized he had not only navigated the challenge but had subtly turned it in his favor, earning cautious respect from those who doubted him. The 3 trials ended and the hall remained quiet. The only sound was Ethan's own heavy breathing. Kilara finally spoke, her voice calm, measured, but carrying weight. "You have survived the first test, human, not through strength, not through raw power, but through observation, patience, and careful judgment. Qualities Zyphora undervalues, yet they are essential for survival." "I am intrigued." "Every hesitation, every success, every mistake, all are remembered. Your next lessons will test more than skill, they will test character. Fail to adapt and the court may decide you are unfit. Succeed and you may find yourself respected, perhaps even welcomed." He noticed patterns, how servants moved silently, how guards positioned themselves strategically, how even the floating food seemed to respond to the social dynamics of the court. Every detail mattered here. Humans often overlooked small things, but he now understood that attention to detail could save a life. As he sat on the edge of his platform, he allowed himself a small smile. The day had been terrifying, exhausting, and confusing, but he had survived. He had adapted. He had succeeded where he had no right to. And most importantly, he realized something that filled him with a strange sense of pride. Humans were underestimated, even by the deadliest princesses in the galaxy, and that underestimation could be a powerful advantage. Late into the night, Ethan practiced further, replaying the trials in his mind. He imagined alternative strategies, tested potential responses to unexpected situations, and even sketched rough diagrams of the puzzles he had faced. In his own way, he was preparing, not just for the next lessons, but for the life he was now entangled in. Kilara appeared briefly before dawn, observing him silently. She said nothing, only watching, her eyes gleaming faintly. Ethan felt both nervous and oddly reassured. It was clear she was testing him even now, but perhaps this was the first sign of true acknowledgement. She had noticed not just his survival, but his willingness to engage with the challenges. "Remember," she said quietly as she left, "adaptation is more than reaction, it is anticipation. Learn this, and you may last longer than most expect." He had entered a world far beyond Earth, faced the deadliest princess in the galaxy, and survived his first test. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, politics, and challenges he could scarcely imagine. But for the first time, Ethan Clarke allowed himself to think not just of survival, but of mastery. If humans were underestimated, perhaps that was their greatest strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and new dangers. But tonight, he had adapted. Tonight, he had survived. And tonight, he had begun to understand why even a human could hold a place in a world designed to test the best of the best. Ethan Clarke closed his eyes and let himself sleep, readying his mind and spirit for whatever Zyphora had in store next. Ethan woke to the faint hum of the palace, sunlight streaming through the tall, crystalline windows. The last 2 days had been exhausting, filled with lessons in observation, patience, and adaptation. He had survived his first trials, but he knew Kilara would not let him rest for long. In Zyphora, every victory was temporary, every lesson a test for the next. He dressed quickly, careful to follow the strange human-alien etiquette he had picked up. Even small gestures mattered here. A wrong tilt of the head or misstep of the hand could offend. Humans were known for creativity, but in Kilara's world, precision carried weight. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed whispers. Nobles and trainees moved around him with subtle glances, murmuring quietly. One of them, a tall, sharp-featured Zyphoran named Vaer, paused and fixed his piercing gaze on Ethan. Ethan felt the familiar weight of scrutiny. The nobles were testing him already, evaluating the human who had survived Kilara's first trials. "Move carefully," Ethan muttered to himself. "Don't overthink. Observe. Adapt." A group of trainees were practicing combat simulations with energy blades that hovered in midair. Some were striking, some were dodging, and the precision required was extraordinary. Ethan had never held anything like an energy blade, let alone trained for agility beyond Earth's gravity. "You will face your second trial," Kelara said. "Physical skill and strategy. Observe, then act. Fail, and the court will note your weakness. Succeed, and you will gain attention and perhaps respect." The first exercise involved dodging a series of energy strikes from 3 Xiphoran trainees. Ethan focused, watching patterns in their movements. He noticed small tells, the angle of the wrist, the tilt of the shoulder, the rhythm of their breathing. He leaned, dodged, and stepped carefully. One strike grazed his shoulder, sending a jolt through him, but he stayed on his feet. Kelara watched silently, noting the human's reactions. "Clever," she muttered under her breath, almost as if speaking to herself. "Not instinctive, but adaptive." Ethan felt outmatched, but he recalled human lessons: anticipate, manipulate the environment, and use unexpected tactics. He jumped, ducked, and used the floating platforms to his advantage, redirecting energy strikes with careful timing. By the end of the duel, he had scored points without relying on speed or brute force. The nobles watching murmured. Kelara's eyes gleamed faintly with something he could not yet name: curiosity and maybe a hint of respect. But Ethan knew the real challenge was not the drills, it was the court itself. Later, during a break, Ethan overheard Veer speaking to another noble. "Do you see the human? The princess's favor is dangerous. He will falter. Mark my words, he is inexperienced." "Too soft for Xiphora." Kelara had summoned representatives from neighboring systems to discuss a potential trade agreement. Ethan, as her human engagement, was expected to participate. The room buzzed with tension. Aliens from multiple species filled the chamber, their customs and languages diverse and intricate. One wrong word or gesture could escalate into insult. The first representative, a winged alien with glowing eyes, questioned Ethan directly. "Human," it said, its voice sharp, "what value can you bring to our negotiations? You do not understand our ways." "I may not share your experiences," he said carefully, "but I bring observation, honesty, and creative solutions. Sometimes a fresh perspective finds opportunities others overlook." By the end, the delegates were nodding, impressed by his clarity and poise. Kelara allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She spoke to Ethan privately afterward. "You are adapting. Your mind moves differently from ours, but that difference is valuable. Remember this." He had survived the physical trial, navigated social challenges, and earned a fraction of respect from the court. But Kelara's final lesson for the day was yet to come, and he could feel its weight even before she spoke. "You will now face a personal test," she said, leading him to a smaller chamber filled with intricate alien devices. "This trial measures not skill, but judgment and morality. You may not like it, but it is necessary. Choose carefully, human. One decision may alter how the court sees you forever." Each choice carried consequences, displayed on the hologram with potential outcomes. Ethan's mind raced. Humans were often judged for bravery and cleverness, not brute strength. He weighed options carefully, considering both immediate results and long-term implications. Using what he had learned about observation and diplomacy, he chose to negotiate first, positioning himself as a mediator while subtly preparing to defend if necessary. The simulation responded to his choices. The civilians were protected, the intruders deterred, and casualties minimized. Kelara observed silently, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if evaluating not just the action but the reasoning behind it. "You understand," she said afterward, "that survival is not only about strength or cunning, it is about balance. You are learning that, human, slowly but perceptibly." He had faced intimidation, complex challenges, and social tests, and he had survived. Kelara's words, though measured, confirmed he was making progress, but not all in the court were pleased. As the day ended, Veer approached, eyes cold. "Human," he said, voice low, "your survival so far is remarkable, but remember, favor with the princess is temporary. One mistake, and you will be remembered as a failure." Ethan realized then that survival in Xiphora was not only about enduring Kelara's tests, it was also about navigating the unspoken rivalries and suspicions of the court. Observation, adaptability, and calm judgment would be his greatest tools. As he returned to his quarters that evening, Ethan reflected on the day. He had dodged energy strikes, solved diplomatic puzzles, and made decisions with real consequences. Each moment had tested him, each choice had been critical, and through it all he had relied on distinctly human traits: creativity, adaptability, and the courage to act under pressure. Kilara appeared once more before he slept. "Do not think you have mastered Zyphora, human," she said softly. "This is only the beginning. Tomorrow, the court itself will test you further. Remember, survival is not only about skill but perception. You must convince others as well as yourself." Humans often succeeded where others failed because they were underestimated. Perhaps that was their greatest advantage. He lay on his floating platform, staring at the ceiling that shimmered like liquid starlight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rival nobles, unexpected trials, and the constant scrutiny of the deadliest princess in the galaxy. But tonight he allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He had adapted, he had survived, and he had proven in small ways that humans could thrive in even the most alien and demanding environments. Ethan Clarke, human and accidental royal engagement, was learning. Slowly, carefully, he was learning how to navigate a world far beyond his own, and perhaps, just perhaps, how to leave a mark that Zyphora would not forget. The morning sun painted the Zyphoran palace in shades of rose and gold, but Ethan's sleep had been restless. He could feel tension in the air, a weight heavier than before. Something had shifted overnight. The whispers in the corridors were louder, sharper, and carried a sense of calculation rather than curiosity. Kilara appeared at the end of the hallway as he made his way to breakfast. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence alone made the hall seem smaller, the shadows deeper. "The court has grown restless," she said simply. "Today you will face more than lessons. You will face strategy, politics, and perhaps deception. Be vigilant." It was clear that not everyone approved of a human surviving the first trials. Kilara's voice cut through the murmurs. "The engagement is binding," she announced. "But survival and respect are not guaranteed. Today, the court itself will test you." The first challenge of the day was a political exercise. 3 rival factions had been invited to present proposals for a trade agreement with a nearby planetary system. Ethan was required to participate, not as an observer, but as an active negotiator alongside Kilara. Each faction sought advantage, and subtle manipulation was expected. The first representative, a tall, armored alien named Rylorn, approached Ethan. "Human," he said, voice sharp, "your involvement here is symbolic. Do you understand the consequences of each decision you make? I will do my best to ensure fairness and safety for all parties." By the end of the session, the proposals were refined, and the factions had begun to trust his judgment. Kilara observed silently, noting Ethan's reasoning and the clarity of his logic. "Humans are often underestimated," she muttered under her breath. "Yet they adapt quickly and see solutions that we overlook." Ethan was led to the palace gardens, where a mock ambush awaited. Robotic intruders simulated an attack on a group of Zyphoran citizens, testing reflexes, strategy, and improvisation. Ethan was instructed to protect the civilians while minimizing casualties. His heart pounded as he assessed the situation. The robots moved faster than anything he had faced before, their attacks precise and relentless. Humans were not as fast or as strong as Zyphorans, but Ethan had something else: ingenuity. He studied the terrain. Floating platforms, hovering light barriers, and the reflective surfaces of the gardens provided opportunities. Using careful timing, he diverted the robots' paths, creating obstacles that slowed them while guiding the civilians to safety. One robot approached a child, and Ethan realized he had seconds to act. He grabbed a reflective panel, angled it to deflect the energy blast, and nudged the child out of harm's way. When the simulation ended, all civilians were safe, and the robots deactivated. Kilara nodded faintly. "Observation, timing, and initiative. You are learning quickly, human, but today is only the beginning." It became clear that some were attempting to undermine him, perhaps to discredit Kilara's judgment or challenge the engagement itself. Ethan realized that surviving Kilara's trials was one thing, but navigating court intrigue required strategy and careful thinking. Humans often succeeded where others failed because they were underestimated, flexible, and willing to adapt. He would need all these skills today. During a brief respite, Kilara approached him. "The court is testing you not just through exercises but through perception. Some may attempt to trap you with misinformation or subtle challenges. Observe carefully, trust your instincts but also your reasoning. A human can survive here, but only if he adapts to every layer of challenge." They were divided on how to respond. Some advocated immediate action, others suggested caution. Ethan was to analyze the situation and advise on the best course of action, knowing that his recommendation would influence both Kelara and the court. He studied the evidence, noting patterns and inconsistencies. He considered motives, potential outcomes, and the principles he had learned. Then he spoke. Immediate action without clear intelligence could cause unnecessary conflict. Caution allows us to gather information, anticipate moves, and protect both the court and the citizens. I recommend a measured response with contingency plans in place. Kelara's gaze met his, a flicker of approval in her eyes. You have demonstrated judgment, patience, and strategic thinking, not instinctive yet effective. Well done, human. He sensed that the court's intrigue was more than words. It was action waiting to happen. That night, he discovered evidence of a plot. Notes, symbols, and overheard conversations revealed a faction attempting to undermine Kelara and challenge the engagement. The plan was subtle, aiming to discredit him and cause a public scandal during the next ceremonial event. Ethan realized he had two choices: alert Kelara immediately or investigate quietly, using his human perspective to gather more information. He chose the latter. Humans often succeeded in unfamiliar environments by observing carefully, learning patterns, and acting at the right moment. He moved through the palace quietly, listening and watching. He pieced together details. The faction planned to manipulate ceremonial procedures, create false evidence, and force Kelara into a position that could damage her reputation. Timing was critical. They intended to strike during the next official banquet. Ethan knew he had to act, not recklessly but strategically. He could not confront the faction directly. He was human, still underestimated and vulnerable. But he could anticipate their moves, prepare countermeasures, and inform Kelara in a way that preserved her authority. He drafted a plan. Using subtle adjustments to ceremonial protocols, discreetly warning loyal allies and preparing contingencies, he positioned himself to protect Kelara without revealing the plot prematurely. Every move relied on careful observation, timing, and reasoning, human skills that Xiphorans often overlooked. Kelara appeared briefly before the banquet, as if sensing his efforts. "You have done well, human," she said quietly. "Your foresight and judgment may prevent disaster. Continue to observe, act when necessary, and remember, the court's perception can be as dangerous as its enemies." To endure Xiphora's court, he needed strategy, courage, and patience. Humans had succeeded in such situations before, through creativity, collaboration, and adaptability. Perhaps he could do the same. The banquet began, and the court gathered in all its grandeur. Aliens of all species mingled, elegant robes and floating ornaments creating a dazzling spectacle. Vayer moved among them, glancing toward Ethan with barely concealed malice. The subtle traps were set, the faction's plan in motion. Ethan watched carefully, noting every detail. He adjusted ceremonial placements, subtly guided Kelara's loyal allies, and prepared for every potential scenario. The banquet progressed smoothly, and the faction's attempts to manipulate events were quietly countered. The court remained unaware of the threat, and Kelara, observing Ethan's discreet actions, allowed a faint smile to touch her lips. By the end of the evening, the faction's plot had been neutralized without anyone realizing it. Kelara stood before the court, her presence commanding, her reputation intact. She looked at Ethan, her gaze meeting his with recognition. "You have done more than survive today," she said quietly. "You have protected the court, defended your position, and acted with foresight. Humans are indeed remarkable." For the first time, he felt that he was not just an accidental engagement participant, but a capable ally in Kelara's world. As the night ended, he returned to his quarters, exhausted but triumphant. He reflected on the day. Physical skill, strategic thinking, observation, diplomacy, and moral judgment had all been tested. Humans might not be the strongest or fastest, but they were adaptable, creative, and capable of turning unexpected situations to their advantage. Kelara appeared one final time before he slept. "You are learning, human. Do not forget that even small actions can influence events beyond your understanding. Today, you have earned the court's quiet respect. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, perhaps greater, perhaps subtler. Remain vigilant, adaptable, and courageous." As he lay on his floating platform, gazing at the shimmering ceiling, he allowed himself a small smile. Humans were resilient, adaptable, and clever. In a galaxy of calculated, precise, and sometimes rigid beings, those qualities were not just enough, they were extraordinary. Ethan Clark, human, accidental royal engagement, and now a subtle protector of the palace, closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new trials, but tonight he had proven something remarkable. Even in the deadliest court in the galaxy, a human could survive, and perhaps even thrive. The sun had not yet risen over Zyphora, but the palace was already alive with activity. Today was different. Ethan could feel it. The whispers in the corridors were sharper, the nobles more alert, and the air thick with anticipation. Something was about to happen, something that could determine not only his future but the stability of the court itself. Kelara appeared at the end of the hallway, her presence commanding, her crimson robes flowing behind her as she moved with perfect grace. Her eyes met Ethan's, sharp and piercing. "Today," she said softly, "you face the ultimate test, not drills, not simulations, but reality. The court will attempt to challenge both of us. You must act, think, and adapt. Fail, and all you have accomplished may unravel." He had survived trials, diplomacy, physical challenges, and subtle intrigue, but now the stakes were higher. The fate of an entire court and his own life depended on him. They entered the main hall where the court had gathered. Nobles from every corner of Zyphora filled the space, eyes sharp, whispers cutting through the tension like fine blades. Ethan noticed Vaer at the edge of the crowd, his expression hard, calculating, clearly preparing to test him one final time. Kelara raised her hand, commanding silence. The engagement of human Ethan Clarke to Princess Kelara is binding, but trust is earned. Today, the court will witness if he is worthy, not just of survival, but of respect, insight, and loyalty. This was more than a trial. It was the ultimate judgment. He had no idea what the court had planned, only that he had to rely on every skill he had honed since arriving on Zyphora. The first challenge appeared immediately. A group of delegates approached with a formal complaint, accusing Ethan of failing to understand Zyphoran culture and of risking the court's reputation in previous exercises. They presented evidence, carefully crafted, subtly manipulated, designed to put him on the defensive. Ethan's mind raced. Humans were often underestimated because they could adapt, think creatively, and remain calm under pressure. He analyzed the evidence carefully, noting inconsistencies and logical gaps. With a calm voice, he addressed the court. "I understand your concerns," he said steadily. "But consider the full context. The outcomes of each action I took ensured safety, minimized risk, and maintained protocol. My approach may differ from tradition, but it preserved both the court and its citizens." She was observing not just his reasoning, but his confidence, his composure, and the human way of turning unexpected situations into opportunities. The second challenge was more immediate, more dangerous. An alert came from the outer palace gates. A small faction of hostile aliens had breached the perimeter, intending to sow chaos during the ceremony. Ethan had seconds to act. Humans might not have the speed or raw strength of Zyphorans, but they had ingenuity and courage. He analyzed the layout quickly. The attackers moved predictably, following a path that exposed them to traps and natural obstacles. Using the palace's environment, he redirected them, guiding them into containment zones without directly engaging in combat. At the same time, he coordinated palace security, giving clear, concise instructions. Kelara joined him mid-action, her movements fluid and precise, a deadly force when needed. Together, human and princess moved as a team, strategy meeting skill, adaptability meeting precision. By the time the attackers were neutralized, the court had observed not chaos, but control, efficiency, and clear thinking. Vaer's expression darkened. His plan to discredit Ethan had failed. The court's attention had shifted from doubt to admiration. Even the most skeptical nobles were now watching carefully, realizing that the human might indeed have value beyond novelty. The third and final challenge came unexpectedly. A surprise council vote was called to determine whether Ethan should continue to participate in the court's activities or be sent back to Earth. The vote would be influenced by perception, alliances, and the subtle politics of the court. Ethan had no time to campaign or plead. Humans excelled in situations where clarity, honesty, and adaptability mattered more than power or status. He stood before the council and spoke plainly. "I am human, yes. I am different, yes. But I have acted with observation, integrity, and strategy. My goal is to protect this court, support Princess Kelara, and ensure stability. I do not seek advantage for myself, only for the court we serve together." Kelara's gaze met his, sharp but approving. "You understand perception, human," she said quietly. "It is as important as skill. You have passed this final judgment with awareness, integrity, and adaptability." The whispers shifted from skepticism to respect, and even Vaer's expression softened slightly, though pride and rivalry still lingered. Kilara stepped forward, addressing the entire court. Ethan Clark has not only survived trials, defended the palace, and upheld protocol. He has also demonstrated judgment, courage, and insight that are rare, even among Xiforans. His engagement is no longer merely a matter of law. It is a partnership built on respect and demonstrated ability. After the ceremony, Kilara led him to a private balcony overlooking the palace gardens. "You have done more than survive, Ethan," she said, her tone quieter now, almost personal. "You have proven that humans, your kind, can thrive in a world that doubts them. That is extraordinary." "I didn't expect this." He realized that in just a few days his life had changed completely. From a nervous human ambassador, accidentally sitting in the wrong seat, he had become a trusted ally of one of the deadliest princesses in the galaxy. He turned to Kilara. "I guess I didn't expect to actually make a difference. Not because you were meant to, but because you chose to. That is the power of humanity, the courage to act, the creativity to adapt, and the honesty to see a problem clearly and do what is right. Xiphora may not have realized it, but it needed someone like you." Yet here, in a palace far from Earth, in a world that demanded perfection, his species had shined. He had survived trials that would have crushed others, navigated political intrigue, and demonstrated judgment and courage where many would have failed. The night fell, and the palace was quiet again, but this time, Ethan felt different. He was no longer just a visitor or a pawn in alien politics. He had earned respect, proven the value of humanity, and secured his place at Kilara's side, not just by law but through action. Kilara spoke one last time before they parted for rest. "Tomorrow, life will continue and challenges will arise. But remember this, humans are underestimated not because they lack strength, but because they surprise others with their ingenuity and courage. That is your greatest advantage." As he lay on his floating platform, watching the shimmering lights of Xiphora, he allowed himself a rare smile. From a wrong seat at a banquet to an engagement with the deadliest princess, to earning the respect of an entire court, he had grown. He had adapted. He had survived. And most importantly, he had shown that humans, ordinary, underestimated humans, could thrive anywhere. Ethan Clark, human, diplomat, accidental royal engagement, and now a trusted ally in a world of intrigue and danger, closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time he felt ready. He was not just surviving Xiphora. He was part of it, and humanity had never looked stronger.